I love it when you get that school age kid who's like playing video games and then they get a little, rage quitty, as we might call it. And you say, "Hey, bud, like, why are you playing that? What are you hoping to get out of it?" And they go, "To relax." And you're like, "Okay, how's that going?" And they're like, "Fine." And you're like, "Let's have that conversation about it."
Meltdowns, screen battles, homework struggles. Sound familiar? Step Inside Your Child's Mind is a series from Brain Futures where child development experts tackle real parenting challenges. You'll unlock the brain skills behind your child's learning, behavior, and emotions. Blending expert insight with real life experiences and a dose of humor, you'll get practical strategies you can use right away to support your child's success every day. This is Step Inside Your Child's Mind. I'm Jessica Rose Malm, Project Director with Brain Futures Youth Executive Function Program. I'm thrilled to be joined today by Dr. Robert Ketter, a developmental behavioral pediatrician at Connecticut Children's, professor at the University of Connecticut School of Medicine, and an ambassador for the American Academy of Pediatrics Center of Excellence on Social Media and Youth Mental Health. Dr. Ketter, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Developmental behavioral pediatrician is something not everyone's heard of. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do and also why the topic of screen time is important in your work?
Absolutely. As a developmental and behavioral pediatrician, that means that I'm a regular pediatrician who took an extra 3 years of training to specialize in child development and behavior. As a developmental and behavioral pediatrician, we help diagnose and support children and families around things like ADHD, autism, learning disabilities, intellectual disabilities, and a lot of common behavioral problems.
And why is the issue of screen time important in your work?
Screen time is kind of related to a lot of behavior nowadays. While we work with a lot of kids around things like toilet training or dealing with school or fighting with siblings, the big number one thing right now seems to be around screen time use. Screens have become like such a everyday part of life that everyone's adapting, including the kids. So there's a lot of managing screen time use in clinic, or a lot of my patients whose families are concerned about their child's degree of screen time use at home and sometimes even in school.
And I mentioned in my intro that you're an ambassador for the AAP Center of Excellence. Can you tell me a little bit about what that center is, what it does?
Sure. The American Academy of Pediatrics created a center of excellence on social media and youth mental health, in part with funding through the federal government and a SAMHSA grant. It's really intended to be a place to create and think about how we can create a healthy digital ecosystem for children and adolescents so that we can help navigate the use of media, which is here, and support kids to be healthy and well and the awesome young adults that they'll become one day.
And that's absolutely why we invited you here. The idea that we're all learning to live in this digital ecosystem and we all need some guidance in how to navigate it. So I'm really excited to have representation from the Center of Excellence with us today. So we reached out to elementary school parents to hear their questions and concerns about screen time. And we heard a lot about meltdowns and fights. Why is screen time, and particularly cutting off screen time, so emotionally fraught?
Cutting off screen time is so hard. All of us as human beings just have this place that we call our pleasure zone and the part of the brain that gets activated when we're in our pleasure center. And as adults, we don't all love it when we get kicked out of there. Like, imagine you had a really long day and you're sitting down at home with a nice cup of tea to relax after you got the kids in bed and somebody just kind of like knocks it out of your hand. You might have some feelings, but you're an adult and you have the coping skills and the language to process that, talk about it, and maybe make some healthy choices. But when you're a 3-year-old where you just get that tablet ripped away from you, oh, it's a lot of going from one emotional space to another really quickly. And if you don't have the words or the experience for how to deal with that, it can be really hard.
That definitely hits hits home. So obviously, I want my kid to see me responding when they knock my cup of tea down, like responding in a reasonable way. What are some healthy screen habits that adults should role model for kids?
So that's a great thought. When it comes to behavior, kids don't do what we tell them, they copy what we do. And one of the most important things that we can start as adults is role modeling what healthy screen time use looks like. And that's different for every family. For some families, you might choose to say that we are screen free at the meal table. So wherever we sit together to eat meals is where we will put phones away. But that also means that as adults, we need to role model that. And if you're waiting for a work email or a message from someone who's going to pick up or drop off the kids, that could be hard. So we kind of have to have those discussions in advance to think about how we want to set up some of those rules. We can also talk about where and when we want screen time to take place. We can role model, do we keep a television in our bedroom? Do we not keep a television in our bedroom? We can also be very clear about role modeling too, like when we're outside, do we sit on screens or do we proactively like go for a walk and leave our phones at home or in our pocket on silent?
Those are all things that I think most of us are guilty of, by violating those rules that we set for ourselves over and over again. Brain Futures is working primarily in elementary schools, so that's sort of our focus today. We know that during that school age, so about 5 to 12, there's a ton of brain development going on and just a ton of changes that are going on with kids. What does the current science say about how screen use affects brain development and school age kids in particular?
We know that screens can have a correlation on how kids grow and develop. We know with younger children that depending on the type of content that they watch, that there can have a positive or negative effect on language development, also on emotional self-regulation and kind of our ability to keep and maintain focus. There are some things for school age kids which is healthy content and could be educational, and that could be great at helping build skills. But then there's a lot of stuff out there that can be really fast paced. It's not designed by educators, it's really flashy and it moves really quick. And we know that that kind of material can have an effect in terms of kids' abilities to regulate their emotion, kids' abilities to sit and be patient, or kids' abilities to sit and kind of think about how they approach new problems.
That makes sense. So it sounds like the type of content does make a difference. Is it also, there's TV, there's video games, there's short form videos, social media. It sounds like what you're saying is that they affect kids differently. They're not all equal. Is that right?
So it's kind of finding the sweet spot. If you're thinking about your child, like you might want to take into consideration who is your kid? Are they more of a calm and easygoing child? Are they a little bit more of a fussy child? Are they able to kind of sit and wait? And when we think about it that way, different kids are ready for different types of content at different ages and their own developmental stages.
That makes a lot of sense. And you also mentioned that screen time is not all negative. There are potentially positive effects for kids. Can you tell us a little bit about some ways that interacting in the digital world has positive effects on kids?
I mean, the digital world brings so many cool, new, and exciting things. It really can be educational. For younger kids, there's tools like Daniel Tiger and Sesame Street and PBS Kids, which has a lot of fun and educational content where you can learn a little bit about the world and emotional self regulation. But as kids get older, even elementary school kids can appreciate learning about history or science or accessing tools that let you start learning things like coding or music skills, which is really cool.
My kids watched a lot of Daniel Tiger when they were little, and we still sing some of the songs when they're having big feelings. So I've seen some of the the positive effects in action. Back to some of the parent questions that we got. A ton of people were asking about limits on time, limits on content. What's your approach to setting screen use limits with kids?
So, setting screen time limits really take consideration of what the whole day looks like. One of the tools that I'm really a big fan of is the American Academy of Pediatrics Family Media Plan, where you can think not just about the where and when you use tech and what the rules are for the family, but to think about a kid's day and how much time is in a day. So we can start with like 24 hours, but then you have to think about how old your child is and how many hours of sleep they need. Some kids might still developmentally need 10 hours of sleep a day. So then, okay, we've taken 10 hours out of the day, and then we take another 6 to 8 hours out of the day for school and transportation. And then we take time out for dinner and homework. And then that helps us kind of create an individualized plan for how much screen time is available for a kid, because we have to think about what does screen time potentially get in the way of or crowd out. If you got all your homework done and you've got nothing to do for the rest of the day, screen time might be okay. But if you need to get to practice or if you want to prepare for your cousins or friends coming over, we might want to think about screen time as getting in the way or crowding out the option of having some of those other activities going on. So it's a little different for each child. And this is where we've moved away from having a flat out this number of hours of recommended time per day because it's a little different. for each child and each family.
That makes sense. And, I think once you as a parent have sort of made those limits for your kids or, figured out what works best, there can still be fights about them. So, how do we set those boundaries in a way that builds buy in from the kids? And we're really just trying to reduce the number of meltdowns and fights as possible. But I think building buy in from the kids and setting those screen time limits is important. Do you have any recommendations for how to go about doing that?
Buy-in is so important, and we have to remember that some things are just built to grab kids' hooks, as I call it. They get kind of locked in and they want it. And part of the challenge of childhood is they want things, and as adults, we're like, soon, but not yet. You're almost there, right? And helping them kind of set those limits and develop that. So that takes a lot of conversation. And that's where it's really important to communicate and have conversations with your child about screen time and media use and what that looks like, and having those conversations about what is healthy screen time. I love it when we get to talk with little kids and ask okay, how did watching that clip make you feel? What did you learn? What were you hoping to get out of it? And even little kids can start to talk with you going oh, that was fun. Or I liked Bluey. Bluey was silly. And it gives you some opportunity to talk about that. But as kids get older, we can also ask what are you hoping to emotionally get out of this? Because I love it when you get that school age kid who's playing video games and then they get a little, rage quitty, as we might call it. And you say, hey, bud, why are you playing that? What are you hoping to get out of it? And they go, to relax. And you're like, okay, how's that going? And they're like, fine. And you're like, let's have that conversation about it. So I think keeping kids' voices here is really important, because one of the key things that we think is really important in child development for everyone is that everybody likes a certain degree of autonomy. That's kind of the thing we're all working on ever since we're little babies. And the challenge of childhood is there are times where you get to have autonomy and times where you don't. But it's really important to help kids understand why, especially around certain things that can really kind of pull them in and easily take over a day. One of the tools that we do have at the Center of Excellence on Social Media and Youth Mental Health is a conversation starters for teens and younger kids. So having those conversations is really important. But if you're how do I start asking some of these questions? There's an easily accessible table topics where you could just pull a topic and go hey, let's talk about this question at the dinner table today. Because when we think about it, how we use screens and media is just how we choose what we eat and develop a healthy and nutritious diet, or how we exercise, or how we sleep, or how we practice our own wellness and mindfulness. So just like we talk about how was your day might include screen time. So talk about that, even at the meal table.
That's a really helpful tool, because I think, especially as you're getting later into elementary school, you start getting the sort of sassier kids, and you as a parent, it gets harder to initiate conversations based on just whatever's on your mind. And so I think, almost looking at it as an assignment for the family of hey, we're going to just talk about this today, makes it a little easier to start that conversation.
It's a tool to help make your day a little easier, because remember, you're allowed to be tired at the end of your workday when you're trying to get dinner ready for your kid too, because it's a long day for everyone. But, the more tools that we have that are out there to help parents and families and caregivers kind of talk about these things, the better we can do with everyone. So it is still important to give yourself the kindness to go, this is a little bit of a challenge, but not terribly. But it's okay to be tired and not talk about this every night. But, throw it in a few nights a week or once in a while.
That makes sense. One of the other challenges that came up when we were talking to parents is the idea of a lot of media now doesn't have a natural stopping point. So an episode of Daniel Tiger is 23 minutes. The end of 23 minutes, we're done, we're good. Not necessarily with something like Roblox or Instagram or anything like that. Do you have any recommendations for how to approach ending screen time when there's not those natural breaks?
Natural breaks are amazing, and we are so lucky to have them, especially when we grew up with episodes of shows being that exact 23 minutes or 7 minutes short, or, a movie that we could define as 90 minutes or 2 hours. Different aspects of social media, whether they be scrolling through a social media feed, a video algorithm feed, or playing a video game, is designed to kind of keep you coming back to it. So we can acknowledge that when kids have a hard time coming away from that, it's not necessarily the child's difficulty completely. We have to acknowledge that there's intentional design in that to kind of keep the child engaged. So, in order to counterbalance those scales, I really invite families to start thinking about how do we help kids start to develop an awareness of how much time might pass. So, I like to, with games like that or a feed, set timers because then we can help kids understand how much time is passing. So, if you have a child who wants to sit and play a video game, great. Get an egg timer where it's like low tech. They can have control over it and say, all right, hey, buddy, set it for 20 minutes. And then when it goes off, pause and take a break. Or you can see if they're playing one of those games that might have a little bit of a natural break, but it's got that 3-second window to decide, do we take that natural break right now or not? And help kind of walk them through that moment to go like, oh, that was an opportunity for a natural break. Let's pause and stop there and take a break for the day. A lot of what is helpful for kids, younger and elementary school age kids, is having some of that co-viewing, because when we're there with the child we can help scaffold and find those opportunities that are unique to the game they're playing or the feed that they're using. But timers, whether it be like old school egg timer or using some other timer that's ideally not a phone, but as kids are older and if they are scrolling on a phone, you can tell it to say, hey, AI, like set a timer for 20 minutes, and when that timer goes up, it's time to get up and move around. The third option would be you as a parent using the screen time features and setting those very hard end limits for how much time the child could have access to for the day. And different platforms have different ways of setting that up. Some of them allow the parent to add more time if the child exceeds all of that, but it's really important to consider who your child is, what the context of the family needs are, and kind of like what content they're using to really find that perfect harmony.
The microwave timer and the oven timer I find those to be good ones because it requires the kid to actually get up, press multiple buttons, and then sit down. You can't just clear it. You have to stand up and turn it off on your own.
That's a brilliant idea, yeah, to really invite them to get up, because that shifting of position too can help bring a little bit of mindfulness, because when we're in that zone, when we're in our flow state, we just kind of want to keep going and we lose track of time. And we do this with analog devices too. Sometimes you get into a good book and that's awesome, but we just don't see the same degree of books creating issues when we find that happy place or pleasure zone or hit flow state that it's hard. So I love that idea of using physical position change or inviting your child to stand up, walk around, take a few steps, hydrate. It could be an opportunity for a hydration break. You never know.
So Brain Futures uses a program called Activate that's a digital training program, and we are doing it in Baltimore County schools. And what's nice about it is even though it's computer based, it also has a physical activity component. So kids will play the computer games and be sort of engaging their brains that way, but then they'll also get up and do balance activities or movement activities that also work their executive function skills, but in a different way that is sort of engaging different parts of their brain and parts of their body. So yes, I'm a big fan of combining digital with movement. So we haven't talked too much about content. What factors should a parent consider when deciding what type of content is sort of age appropriate for their kid?
So every child is unique. So, first, before we get to content, we do need to consider the child because they could be ready for things. There are some 13-year-olds who might seem ready for online play or engagement with others, and there are some 16-year-olds who might not be ready yet for some online play or engagement with others. So, once we move from there, considering content, we can really think about like what's fast paced or slow paced. We can think about what kind of messaging there might be. Kids can pick up on even subtle and implicit messages. That's why when it comes to things like social media or anything that has advertising revenue, kids are picking up on the messaging behind the advertising revenue. They might be picking up on the messaging of different influencers with explicit values that they could be talking and sharing about, or implicit values, things like how they have their background set up, or what they're wearing, or how they wear their hair. And that kind of can be different for each child. There might be a child who pays absolutely no attention to that. But then you might have a kid who's like, oh, yeah, I want to look just like so and so. You could also have kids trying to copy or emulate content too, because they might be copying words or phrases and using slang that you might not like for your household use. So, considering what that content is involves a lot of things: how fast paced it is, what kind of messaging there is, whether or not it brings the child themselves calm as a way of like helping them really settle, or is it kind of like just a filler that kind of moves them through to the next space? As kids get older, it's really important too to engage them in asking them what they're hoping to get out of the content, because that helps them figure out whether or not it's content that they're appreciating themselves or if it's kind of like filler content.
Yeah, and one of the concerns I think around content, because there's just so much of it, is safety. Like, and we want our kids to be able to engage in the digital environment in a way that they feel comfortable, that they feel supported, that they're getting something out of it. But we also want them to be safe and know that things like cyberbullying and how to interact appropriately online, like those are all things that they need to be aware of. So it's any suggestions on how to sort of have that talk about the risks and the safety, but also be supportive of it?
So, a whole separate consideration, I think that this is great, is thinking about the interactive nature of media use. There's kind of the passive content where a kid might just be absorbing it, like videos, but then there is the interactive component, which could be any social media platform. And that's any platform that can involve leaving comments to reading other people's opinions to even games that might have like a chat room or a voice chat feature. The questions that you're asking about refer to a concept that we call digital citizenship. How do we develop an understanding and awareness of who we are and what the social rules are for online spaces? We do need to teach children, just like we do about stranger danger and what information is appropriate to share with someone in person versus not. The same rules, but in a different way, apply online, and we need to be really mindful about. So there are certain things where we should tell kids, like, you don't share your last name on the internet, or you don't share your birth date or where you live with anyone, and that there is certain information that is important to not talk about. We can also talk about how sometimes when kids or other people get online, because there's a certain degree of anonymity, that kids might change their behavior and be really mean, and talk about what cyberbullying is and what's appropriate behavior. And just because you don't see the effect that it could have on someone, we can really ask kids, what would you like if someone did that to you? And talk about how we create kindness and kind spaces online. We can also talk about how that information can leave what we call a digital footprint too, because we can ask kids, especially older kids, like, is this the kind of content that you want to leave where somebody can go back and see that you left this? Or is this something more personal that you want to be ephemeral and in the moment? Because there are times where, we have conversations and we're like, okay, great. And then we never think about it again. But when it's logged in as a blog or a video blog, right, it could stay there. Or if you're having something, someone could screenshot it. And we do need to tell kids that that's why even though we think we might be sending something in private, that it's not really private.
I think I'm one of many parents who is so glad that the internet didn't exist for a solid portion of my adolescence, because it's just great to know that those things can stay hidden in my memory and the memories of my friends, and they won't live on forever on the internet.
Well, but what you ask about, though, brings up another question, which is really important. And this is where, as a pediatrician, I'd like to have that conversation with families, because technically we live in a world now where you decide whether or not to start your child's digital footprint. You can role model the behaviors that you want at home if you are saying, like, oh, I'm going to take pictures and post them online. If you start doing that while your child's an infant, then you've been promoting these implicit messages that that's okay, and that's kind of a permissible behavior. So how do we think about that? And I don't know that I have the right answer, but I do like to help families pause and reflect so that we can have that conversation about it. Because if we stop and think about it, you know, children don't initially consent to what they have online while they're still young until you put the device in their hands. And we want to have the conversation of, like, honey, is this something that you want people to see 10 years from now?
How do you suggest navigating that, again, both for kids and for parents? If I don't feel like my kid is quite ready for a smartphone, or I don't want them to have it, how do I make that clear to them and feel good about my decision, and also make them feel good about the decision?
That is a really good question, because how do we acknowledge that even young kids want to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak? And that's not just smartphone or media discussion. It's like, well, all the other kids have this cool toy. Why can't I have it? I think that it's really important that we start establishing what family rules are really early. And we can talk about what the rules are for this house and this family. And that's why we do have to role model them first. We can talk with kids and have conversations about when and if things are appropriate. We can also talk with kids about how they are trying to level up their own executive function and responsibility with things like chores and other things, because not everybody just gets a driver's license when they turn 16. So it's a little bit different for each kid in each family context. I think as we talk through families, there are so many pieces to consider. What's your kind of family's parenting style? Are you more just like, boom, this is the word, and that's just what we're doing in this family? And that could be the law that you have, but it might not be a way to kind of engage the kids in that conversation. I think it's really important to help kids understand that you're making decisions to help show them that they're working towards growing up. So instead of making it punitive, I really like to think about how we can focus on building it as a constructive pathway. Kids are not going to be children forever. So, in order to give them the path, how about we give them the life syllabus to go, well, if you want phone, these are the steps that you need to get to. And sometimes they're age based. That's where we can say, like, well, the law is you can't have social media until you're this age. And then that could be changing depending on where you live and what state you live in. But also saying, like, well, what do we need a phone for? Right? If we're going to start taking you to soccer practice and you need to communicate rides, okay, we can get you a phone, but maybe it's going to be a phone that only does text and calls, and that's it. And that's kind of the decision that works for this family. And then if your child's like, but I want a smartphone with all of this, then you can say, like, well, here's the skills that we want to see that you're showing you're working towards the responsibility of trying to get a phone. Because I think we need to help kids understand that phones are a nice privilege to have, but not something that you have a right to, in the similar way that not everybody gets a driver's license or a car, but that's a more like clear cut boundary where you have to pass a test and get all the rules and things in place, whereas kids just see phones everywhere and all the time. So it does start early. The reality is kids want phones because phones are designed for people to want them. And I think that once we can help kids understand that there's a want to have it, but that it comes with responsibility and that you need to show that responsibility as being very transparent, we can help kids really understand that when we want things, sometimes it's because we intrinsically want it, but other times it's because other things want us to have them. And we don't realize the hidden strings that come with it. If you have a 14-year-old where you're really reasoning through, like, okay, here's the skills that we need you to show in order to get a phone, awesome. Whereas with the 6-year-old, you could just be like, honey, no phones. You're too little.
This is a question that really hit home for me. It came from another parent, but I could have written it myself. Sometimes we need to get stuff done. We need to make dinner. We need to pay bills. We just need our kid to be occupied, entertained, focused on something else. And screens are a very easy, convenient, and like pleasurable way to do that for our kids. If we've built that habit of when I'm making dinner, you are on your screen, and then there's a fight at the end of it, or we feel like it's just kind of going on too long. How can we identify some other activities that kids could do that sort of meet the needs of the parents in that moment and also meet the needs of the kids and that they're pleasurable and easily accessible?
So this is a multi-layered question. First, let's acknowledge that when I talk parenting with families in clinic, I really like to say that, like, we live 80 to 90% of life in go mode, which is get dinner on the table, get the kids picked up, get things washed, get kids to bed. But we do need to do a little bit of teaching mode once in a while. And that's ideally when it's like the weekend where you don't have to work and the child's emotionally available and we can practice kind of like new things. But first off, give yourself that space to acknowledge that if you're just one caregiver or parent at home and you've got two kids and you're trying to get dinner ready, like, it is okay to pick some high quality content and have your child kind of sit there and engage with it. If you schedule that to coincide with your time to get stuff done in the kitchen, you can also start choosing to kind of level up kids' executive function too and invite them to help participate in the process as kids developmentally get older or have the ability to do so. So that's where you might plan and say, like, hey guys, I'm going to set the timer and that's going to be me getting dinner ready, but it should be done when you're done with that episode. And when it's done, I need you to come here and help me set the table. And you can practice a skill like setting the table. And as kids get older, maybe you want to invite them to help participate and prepare dinner, because how do we even learn how to cook sometimes? That could be a neat or fun thing to do. We can also think about other opportunities. You might have a child who likes to play music or read or use another tool that we can schedule for that time. Because I think sometimes we do go to media because it is an easy outside of the box tool. But we also have to take some time where we plan when we don't need to get stuff done in teaching mode, where we can go like, hey, we have an hour. We're going to have a tech free hour. What can we do for that hour? And explore that with the kid, because what you might like to do could be different than what they like to do, right? We could always ask about the pets, like, what does the cat do for an hour? And they're like, the cat looks out the window and watches the birds. Okay, awesome. Does that work for you? And then you try it and you're like, okay, it's been 5 minutes. I'm over the birds right now. But you tried it. So like, let's explore what other things we could do. Could we make music? Could we read a book? Could we color? Could we build blocks or Lego? Could we figure out a way to write a letter to someone? There are lots of opportunities for what we could do.
I talked to my kids about this a little bit, and I think, again, getting back to what are they trying to get out of it? Obviously, in that moment, like, I just need them to be entertained and out of my hair so I can get dinner on the table. But if they're coming off a long day of school and they've done their homework and they just want to zone out, sometimes TV is good. Sometimes they like to listen to an audiobook and color, so they're still getting some other stimulation, but they're not staring at anything. And, so because we're able to identify sort of the state of mind that they're in and what they want to get out of it, that's helped us to identify some of those other activities that they could be doing to get sort of the same effect.
Yeah, I think it's really important to know your child and exactly that. But you can also try to introduce things too. If you're going to say, like, hey, I think board games are a great way to build some offline skills, which they are, great. But you don't want the first time your child plays a board game to be when you're going to get dinner ready, because they're going to need some help with understanding, how do I get into it? How do I figure out how to play? How do I take turns and learn what the rules are? So I love that. We want to scaffold kids, but that's where really acknowledging that if you're in what I call get stuff done mode or business mode of parenting, that's not optimal teaching time, just because you're not emotionally available to teach. And that's okay, because we still need to get all the things done, like laundry and food and meals and school prep and homework and all of that. But you can pick a time on a vacation day or a weekend night or an afternoon where you can say, like, hey, let's try the skill out. And once the kids learn it, like coloring, or like, ooh, I do like audiobooks, I really got into this one, I can't wait for the next chapter, then you can schedule that for when you need to get stuff done, because you can sign off, my kid knows how to do that now, without supervision.
Well, this has been incredibly helpful. I was just wondering if you have, I know we've talked about the AAP Center of Excellence resources, but are there any other resources and tools that you think are just really essential for parents of kids, elementary age kids?
So some of the tools you've heard are those that are available at the American Academy of Pediatrics Center of Excellence on Social Media and Youth Mental Health. Some of the vocabulary you've heard me talk about is something that we call the 5 Cs, which is a framework to think about who the child is, what the content they're potentially viewing, how they might calm down, and how does the media affect their ability to be calm? How does the media crowd out what they might need to do, like homework or peer time or catching up with friends and family? And how do we communicate about that? And there are tools on that website, including the conversation starters, or even fun games like Pop Up at Whack-A-Mole, to start teaching like what is commercial content and what's not. There are many more resources on the center. I really do love my favorite one, which is the social media glossary, where you can look up a lot of the various social media platforms, especially because it's hard for me to keep up with what kids are into. So like when kids are in clinic, I Google it, but inviting parents to figure out like what are the policy guidelines and how does YouTube work versus how does TikTok work versus how does Discord work. You can look all these up on the Center of Excellence website, and it talks about what the platform design is, who it was intended for, how it's used, and how there are different parental controls available for each. Another tool that I really love, and a partner of the Center of Excellence on social media, is Common Sense Media, which is a nonprofit group. So commonsensemedia.org, where there's all kinds of stuff, including digital citizenship curricula for schools and for parents to think about how do we teach kids about things like online safety and use. What's also neat is you can look up different movies, games, apps, and kind of see what different developmental experts think about it in terms of content. And it helps you make the decision yourself whether or not you think that content might be appropriate for your child and in what context it could be helpful for. I also really like, if you're looking for some offline activities too, the Harvard Center on the Developing Child has some really great tools, including their like executive function toolkit with a whole cool set of analog activities that you can do where you can play. Because I love it. Games like red light, green light are some of the first way that kids actually learn to physically control themselves. But how can we do that and level up with other tools like board games or reading a book or drawing or playing music?
I don't know if it was a mistake, but I made the mistake of looking on Common Sense Media at, just some of my favorite movies from, the 80s and early 90s that I watched as a kid. And I don't remember all of the totally age inappropriate things that were in there, but I definitely decided to hold off on sharing those with my kids.
Yeah, I think when we get really excited about stuff or nostalgic, we remember certain parts of it, but not all of it. Some of my favorite movies, I'm like, oh, I can't wait to share. Oh, not yet. No, we got a while. We got a while for this one, which is really hard because, we like media too, because media is a form of art and it can be good, right? When it brings some of those positive memories and we engage, we love that. But we just have to remember kids are not tiny adults yet. They're working their way there and we got to help them get there, which means figuring out what the timing is. So that child aspect and the content aspect are really important.
Okay, well, Dr. Ketter, thank you so much for talking with me.
Thank you for having me.
If folks haven't done so already, please check out our previous conversations in the series covering executive function skills and emotional regulation. This conversation series is produced by Brain Futures, a mental health nonprofit advancing innovation by bridging the gap between research and practice. This series is made possible through the generous support of the Maryland Community Health Resources Commission and the Maryland Consortium on Coordinated Community Supports. The views presented here are those of Brain Futures and our guests, and not necessarily those of the Commission or the Consortium. Please join us for all 3 conversations in this series as part of our work to strengthen youth executive function skills and improve mental health in Maryland Title I schools. Learn more at brainfutures.org.